then that goes away, and then just refreshes.
Okay, good morning. My name is Gary Matsuoka, and we're here at Lagoon Hills Nursery on Saturday morning. And today we have a question and answer session. So we'll start first with anyone from the audience.
Anything? That's the microphone. We have a microphone here too. If you...
Best if you have gardening questions.
Yeah, so of course.
But anything. Put this mic here if you.
Oh, well, I'm going to ask the avocado question.
Sure.
My gem that I bought 3 years ago.
Use the mic here.
Oh, use the mic. The gem I bought 3 years ago, it did well in the pot. I was going to grow it in this pot.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have a picture of it. I mean, even though it was root bound, the plant was fine.
Mm-hmm.
So then I transplanted into the bigger, that square planter. And so this year, 2 years, I have not had any fruit from it. The first year it had several. And then I sprayed it with Neem because there was some pesticides on it.
Mm-hmm.
So now I have the current picture. It has lost a lot of its branches. The branches are black. Some of them are black and they drop off. And the leaves were turning brown throughout the whole tree. And then now I got new growth on it, and I want to know how to maintain it now.
Well, it sounds like it's acting fairly normal. I mean, this winter, most of the avocado trees all the leaves from last year would just turn brown and drop off, and then they'd have a new set. That's kind of normal.
Oh.
And also, once the tree gets older and fuller, there's a lot of branches on the interior that just turn black and die, just because they're too shaded in there. So they just kill themselves off, and then they have. But as long as because this photo here, if this is recent, the leaves look really healthy.
No, that's 2 years
Okay.
ago. It's 2 years. I have the current one. The leaves look healthy, but I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to keep it healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And the branches, I mean, the tree it's empty to the top. It has leaves, but there's like a stem. So I'm concerned, is my tree dying?
Well, if anything, in containers, we're always worried about lack of water, so you may have to trim it smaller, and you can do that this time of year if you want. Well, not during the heat wave. And just get it smaller so that it doesn't dry out on you. That's the only thing that we really worry about, is it drying out between watering, and then it tends to abort fruit.
Okay.
If you let it dry out. So.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a couple of questions. I see your stuff on the table up there. One of them, I see you've got the ant stuff up there. We've got black ants like crazy around right now because of the heat and the lack of water and stuff. What's a good?
Well, if you haven't used this before, this
I have
been
not.
Our best ant control. So ants in general cause trouble in the garden. Of course, you don't want them in your house either. But most of the ants we have, well, it's the Argentine ant that's most common here, which is not native here, and those farm sucking insects. So their job is to move aphids from weeds to your plants, and move mealybugs, and move whitefly, and move scale, and protect it from ladybugs and other predators, because they want to eat the excrement, which is sugar water. Honeydew is sugar water. So we want to, if you keep the ants out of your garden, you eliminate half the pest. All the sucking bugs don't have much of a chance, because when it's warm, the ladybugs and lacewings and other good bugs eat them up. So we want to get the ants out of the garden. And so far, of the products we can get, this has been the best product. It won't work forever, in that most, if you use this a few times, most of the ants that survive it are immune. So you have to go to a different product. But for the initial control of ants, this has worked for us the best. We've been carrying this product for about 25 years, and it's worked quite well.
Okay. My other question is night blooming jasmine. I've got white flies all over those things, and I spray them. I've been online, check remedies, and one of the things is using dish soap. Spray them every week or every couple of weeks. It works for a while, but they just keep coming back. Is there anything that can be put in the soil that can help with that, or is it I just got to keep spraying them?
Well, there is a product that will work, but it's being taken off the market the end of the year. But the one that really works is a chemical called Milkweed, and we still have it on the shelf, but it'll be legal in 2025. So this is a systemic. It's one of the few we have that we can sell you. It's been taking off the market, I think, more for political reasons than for scientific reasons. So 20 years ago, or 15 years ago, this was implicated. Everybody thought, we're having all this bee colony collapse. So they had to look for something to blame, and because imidacloprid was a new pesticide on the market, and it does kill bees, they were going to blame it. University of Washington kind of showed in their research that it wasn't at fault, because when they tested the hives, they couldn't find this chemical anywhere in the hives. They weren't, the bees that get killed by it don't make it back to the hive. So it's like, it's not killing the hive off, because bees, when they're foraging, on their last few days of their life, when they're foraging, so it really had not much to do with it. They kind of, since then, have pointed to the varroa mites, the bee parasites that are spreading a disease in the beehives, and that's apparently what all the beekeepers believe is killing off the bees, and that same disease wiped out the bumblebees across the U.S. So we know that's to blame for a lot of things, not this product, but it's been taken off the market on the East Coast a while ago, and next year will be taken off California. But this one, if you put it, now the nice thing about night blooming jasmine, Cestrum nocturnum, is that it doesn't draw bees, as far as I know.
Right. Yeah, I haven't seen them around. I've got bees around the yard, but they don't go in the plants.
Right. So this one, if you apply it, and we still have it on the shelf in the back, to the soil below the plant, it'll make the whole plant poisonous to any sucking bug for up to a year.
And you were talking about, when you were talking about the ant killer, you were talking about ladybugs, and ladybugs good for the whiteflies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, ladybugs. Well, there's natural predators. They may not be ladybugs, but there are natural predators that eat whitefly.
And then the lizards will eat the ladybugs.
I don't know if they will. Ladybugs are pretty foul tasting.
Oh, are they? I've never eaten one.
Yeah, if you've ever, well, we carry the little containers of ladybugs.
Yeah, right.
And they can give off a horrible stench. There's so many in there. They're agitating each other.
Uh-huh.
And one of the things the ladybugs do when they're agitated, they give off a foul odor.
I didn't know that.
So that usually prevents things from eating them. And that's why they're so brightly colored too. So animals realize the brightly colored insects aren't very good tasting. They may not be poisonous, but they're not good tasting.
Because I've gotten ladybugs, before, and then I'll take some and dump them underneath the plant, and they'll climb up in there, and the whiteflies are gone for a while. But then the ladybugs are gone, then the whiteflies come back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions?
Gary, I have a question. I have a 15-year-old grapefruit tree that has never bared fruit. Should I take it out?
In a pot?
No, it's in the ground.
What kind of grapefruit do you know?
No.
There's some grapefruit that don't really have much of a chance of fruiting here.
Oh.
They need a much hotter climate, and you're coastal too on top of that. So, Ruby, the original Ruby grapefruit, doesn't seem to do that well here. I don't know if it's been that long. I would just remove it.
Okay.
The grapefruit that tends to produce really well. Okay. Anyone else? Oh, you.
I'm a beginner gardener. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You are too. We have 2 passion fruit vines. They're kind of growing, but they are kind of getting yellow, the leaves now. Is that water problem, or I've got a lot of fruit on one and a few flowers and a little fruit on the other one?
Well, first we have to know where the passion fruit vine came from.
I think one might. Do you have them here?
Uh-huh.
I think one came from here and one came from the San Diego area.
Okay. And these were planted recently?
The spring of this year.
Yeah, we haven't. So generally, if we grow a plant here in our own top pot, now we don't sell only plants that we grow. We sell plants that other people grow too. So the problem we have is that our industry still thinks that plants should be grown in compost. And anytime you have compost around the roots of a plant, it can make it turn yellow because the compost is rotting and it's taking the roots with it.
Oh.
Whereas if we grow them, they're in our own proprietary soil called top pot, and there's no way they'll ever rot in that. So too much water doesn't hurt plants when the roots are healthy, but too much water can hurt plants when they're growing in compost. So now, of course, the other thing is lack of fertilizer will make them turn yellow too. If they're growing fast but they're turning yellow, that's lack of fertilizer. If they're not growing and turning yellow, that's usually a root rot problem.
Okay, they're growing still, so it might be lack of fertilizer then.
Yeah, just probably good fertilizer.
Okay, so you
And,
could
and usually
suggest-
passion fruit vines or passion flower vines don't rot this time of year. It's usually in the winter when it's colder that we see
Okay.
more rotting going on this
Okay.
time of year. They love the heat, so they just get going.
Okay,
So
okay. For a winter garden, what fruit or vegetables are best, and what do I do to prepare the soil for a winter garden?
well, generally, most plants grow in the soil as is.
Okay,
All the planter mixes out there are worse than the soil you have, so be careful. Planter mixes and potting soils and garden soils that are being sold by other companies other than us are all composts. Now, those are good on top of the ground, but if you try to use them as soil itself, then the plants rot on you very easily, or the roots just don't develop in them, because plant roots tend to want to grow in real dirt, which is on a good farm. If you look at real dirt, it's almost pure sand.
oh, we have
Uh,
clay.
Well, clay is not poisonous unless you mix compost with it.
Okay.
So that's one of the problems we have. So clay by itself. So back in the 1800s, the farmers all hung out Fountain Valley, Westminster, Los Alamitos, which is solid clay, because clay soil was considered in those days the rich soil because it stayed wet after the rainy season. Whereas the sandy soils the farmers love nowadays would be bone dry a week after the rain stopped and they couldn't grow anything in it. So the sandy soils were considered the poor soils back in the 1800s because you couldn't grow things in it unless we didn't have technology back then to irrigate. But now all the farmers are in sandy soils because plants grow a lot faster as long as they're irrigated. The clay soils, there's nothing wrong with them unless you mix compost into them, then they just rot everything.
Okay.
So,
Mix sand and clay.
oh yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so soil is what's called loam. So loam is a term they use for soil that plants can grow in. It's always a blend of sand, silt, which is just smaller sand, and clay. You need the clay to hold some moisture, but you don't want, if it's more than 35% clay, then the soil has no air pockets left
That's what it is.
to allow the air to flow through. So the plants tend to grow slower in clay, but they still grow. They grow faster in sand, but you got to water it daily, it seems like. You don't have to water more than you do in clay. You just have to water more frequently and lightly to get the same reaction you would in clay.
You talked before about if you can find it, mixing in lava rock or
Yep, pumice, lava rock, perlite, sand can all make clay soils breathe better. The advantage of lava rock is that you can get by with less. So sand, what we've been told is you have to almost double the volume of your soil with sand to make it breathe better if it's clay. But with pumice rock, if the soil was, I think the literature told us, if it was 10%, 10% pumice, by volume, there'd be rock to rock contact and the air would get through the clay. So it doesn't take as much pumice. Sand, you might have to go 50% sand to get the air pockets in there. But pumice, because it's got holes going through it, you can get by with a lot less. So
And then vegetables, the best vegetables to plant right now or in the next little while, or when am I supposed to plant them?
yeah, we're about to change from hot weather plants to cool weather plants. So in a month, it would be too late to plant your hot weather plants, but we're still have enough heat right now in early September to do stuff like summer squash. You can probably still get some of the smaller tomato varieties to produce. An eggplant, if you buy the plants already started. If you don't start the seeds, it'll take too long for those. Now, what's interesting is some of the newspapers in the area, they must have junior editors or something that tell you, oh, it's time to plant winter squash now for winter. It's like, no, winter squash you plant in the spring, you eat it in the winter.
Oh, okay.
Summer squash you can plant because you can harvest in 2 weeks. It's that fast.
Okay.
So we got plenty of time to do summer squash. Winter squash takes like 3 or 4 months to mature. It's just that the mature winter squash, you can store them for 4 or 5 months, so you can eat them in the winter. But the journalists, I don't know, today's journalists don't have any experience, so they'll tell you winter squash, plant it now, so you can harvest in winter. But it's too late for that. Now there's some vegetables you can plant any time. So root crops, which would be carrots, radishes, any time of the year, beets, any time of the year. Some of the pardon?
Potatoes?
No, potatoes are a winter crop.
Okay.
Yeah. The cabbage and kale and Swiss chard don't seem to be affected by heat, which is really weird. You think of these as cool season crops, and they're probably better in the cool season, but I had a cabbage plant in my yard for 5 years, same plant, and it grew a really long stalk, but it still had the head of cabbage on the end of it. It wasn't affected by the heat or the long days. I would think cabbage is from a more northern climate, so unless we have those 15 16-hour days that they do in Canada or northern Europe, they just don't bloom here. Kale may be on the same thing. Swiss chard seems to go a year or two before it blooms and goes away.
So you're saying carrots, the root crops, the carrots, the radishes, beets, you can do those anytime?
Any time of the year.
Oh, didn't know that.
Yeah. A lot of crops can only be in the ground for a year before they bloom. So a lot of crops, root crops, the first year they make the root, and the second year they use the energy in the root to flower and then die. But still, you can grow the roots anytime. I started carrots once in August for a project, and they were fine.
What about onions and garlic, that kind of stuff?
Onions and garlic are a winter spring crop.
So don't plant them now.
It's too early. Well, if you plant onions now, especially from seed, they'll grow a nice bulb, but they'll bloom in the spring, which kind of ruins.
Yeah.
So onions, if they're, what we were told, if they're thicker than a pencil in January, if the stem's thicker than a pencil, it's going to flower that spring. And that ruins the storage of you can still eat them, but that ruins the bulb for storage because it takes all the energy out of the bulb and it's gone. So we don't want to start onions too early because they will bloom. You can start garlic now, but it won't grow until November, December. So in Gilroy, they say we plant the shortest day of the year and we harvest the longest day of the year. But you can leave garlic in the ground year round. It doesn't, it blooms, but you can still use the bulbs. So.
Do you want me to keep asking?
Yeah, if you have more questions.
I have 2 real large palm trees, and I have I'm trying to put hydrangeas below, and they're struggling a little. Is it because of the palm trees and the roots from the palm trees, or?
Well, yeah, you have to compensate for the water that the roots take. It's mainly a competition for water.
Okay.
So as long as you water enough for the palm trees and the hydrangeas, but hydrangeas, when you first plant them, it's a mess because sometimes we're having 100-degree weather right now. We have to water our hydrangeas twice a day. Just because they've got such big leaves, they're using water really fast. Now, once they get the roots mixed in with the palm tree roots, they'll be in better shape.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. We have a plum tree that hasn't had any fruit for about 6 years. And would I need another plum tree? What's its problem?
No, most plums are self-fertile.
Okay.
The problem we're having is that we haven't had cold enough winter for, I don't know, do you know the name of your plum tree?
No.
So the most common plum tree planted, unfortunately, is Santa Rosa, which needs 400 hours or more of winter chill. That's temperatures lower than 55, higher than 34. This year we didn't get close. Last year we actually hit it, and our Santa Rosa plums here had a few fruit, but for the 10 years before last year, there wasn't enough cold there either. Now, the problem with plum trees is if you don't get enough chill that winter, they don't develop the proper fruiting wood for the next year. So it's almost like you need 2 good years in a row to get fruit on a plum. So one year you get the cold to get them to grow fruiting wood, and then the next year you get the cold to make that fruiting wood bloom and fruit. But if you only get one cold year every so often, it's just not going to work. So we haven't had a really good plum crop with plums in the ground since maybe 2012.
Okay.
So it's been a long time. We've had a lot of warm winters. Now the winters are trending cooler. The last 6 years they've been trending cooler, whereas 2013, 14, 15, 16 is the hottest winters since the early 80s. Now we've seen this cycle before, so it's not like doomsday. They keep telling us it's going to warm up forever, but we saw hot winters in the early 80s where we were actually just cutting down and throwing away plum trees in those days because they wouldn't even leaf out. And the same with peaches and nectarines. And then it got really cold winters, the late 80s, early 90s were the coolest winters ever recorded. And then we had hot winters again, 2013 through 2017. And then it's from that point on, it's gotten cooler again. So we'll see what happens in the next few years. But yeah, the worst place to accumulate winter chill is on hills. So if you live on a hilltop in Orange County, you're not getting much chill. If you live near the San Ana River, you get enough chill every year to get plums.
Yeah.
The low spots in the area, the cold air in the wintertime sinks to lowest areas, so they get the most chill. So people live in canyons, at the bottom of canyons and near big rivers get enough chill for plums just about every year. But if you're on a hilltop or on a plateau somewhere like Costa Mesa, you're not getting that much chill.
So would you take that plum tree out? We're on a hilltop.
Yeah, well, I lived on a hilltop for 20 years, and we had half those years were good plum years. But that was 90s. The 90s were cool enough for plums on hilltops, and till about 2008, and then it got too warm. So, but if you don't know what kind of plum it is, it may be, because I grew Santa Rosa on a hilltop for 20 years and I got one crop.
Oh.
It just wasn't cool enough consistently for that one. My other plums did better. So.
Okay, well, in our yard, citrus is going great, and apricots are good. Apples are kind of but if I have room for 3 more trees, would you put peach in, or I'm not going to put another plum in?
There are peaches that are quite reliable.
Okay.
So peaches are good. Persimmons are fine. Pomegranates fine. Apples, we're finding them to be very reliable.
I think that they're coming back, the apples. They're going to be okay.
Figs, well, we got a problem with the bug now with figs, but they always fruit. Grapes are fine. to get the right grape.
So would you do a bare root peach tree then at the right time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Peaches have been the nice thing about peaches is they're very predictable. If you get the winter for them, they will flower and fruit. So most everybody had a good peach crop this year,
Okay.
but hardly anyone got plums.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. Well, we'll just leave it there for a little while longer.
but
and
you
see.
said you got apricots,
This year we didn't have as many. Last year we had
right?
tons.
Last year we had a good year.
Yeah. This year we had probably 30, maybe.
Yeah. So you still got decent chill though. Some of the low chill plums might still work, but apparently the one you have is not low chill.
Yeah, it's not. It's been a long time, and okay, I think that is most of my questions. If somebody
Okay.
else wants to.
Anyone else? Okay.
Yeah. There's a
Um,
microphone he wants you.
oh. Avocados.
Mhm.
I have some in pots, and I've been wanting to put them in the ground. When is a good time, especially with the weather now, to wait to put them in the ground?
Well, I would say just now when it's 100 degrees, so wait a couple days. You're supposed to drop into the low 80s, high 70s by midweek, but do it when it's hot because avocados are from the tropics. They don't like it cool at all. They'd rather have the soil nice and warm. We just don't want to see it above 100 when you do it because that can burn some of the branches if you turn it like most plants like avocados are used to facing a certain direction. If you then switch the direction on it when you plant it, then some of the sides were facing north and now facing south may sunburn on you. But if you're not getting sunburn now, it's not, we haven't seen any sunburn on most of our avocado trees at all, even though they claim, and the news said it hit 110 yesterday in Santa Ana. If it did, it hit it for 5 minutes. Because they showed the spike of temperature just went up to a peak and then back down. So it just must have been a real short 110 degree spike because it was, we felt it was like 103 yesterday maybe. And it didn't stay there that long either. So, but anyway, we have a growing ground of avocado trees on black plastic next to a rock road on the west side of a block wall, and we haven't seen, I think we saw one stem that showed signs of sunburn out of about 100 avocado trees over there. So if they're healthy trees, they shouldn't burn unless it gets above 110. Then we're in trouble.
When you say it burns, are you talking about the leaves or? Because I do have some leaves that do get a little burned. I've tried covering them with shade cloth, but the ones that don't get covered.
Well, we're not worried when the leaves get burnt. That just happens if they were, because a lot of times leaves were in the shade for a while and then you put them out in the sun, they can't get used to that sudden change because they developed in the shade and they'll burn, but then they get used to it real fast and it doesn't hurt the plant any further. We're more worried about the stems and the trunk burning.
Okay.
When that turns black or gray, then it cuts off the circulation. You can lose that whole area of the tree. Now we're also seeing on a few plants, if it stays real hot, especially if it gets near pavement or masonry of some sort, the air is so hot and dry that the new growth shrivels. It just can't handle that heat. The mature leaves don't seem to have any trouble at all, but the new growth tends to shrivel. So
2 more questions. One, what would you recommend for a kind of like a fast growing shade tree, not a really big one, but just a nice size shade tree that can handle a small area?
Well, one of the popular ones that we carry because it doesn't it doesn't get too big is redbud.
Redbud.
So right now I've got some nice looking Mexican redbuds. We've had I have some other redbuds growing in our growing ground, Oklahoma and forest pansy, which is eastern, but the Mexican redbud is quite attractive. Now, right now they would only plant out this big because we got them bare with this winter. But at our growing ground, we put a couple of the ones that are this big into bigger pots. And it's now 2 months later, they're about this big. So they've grown very quickly when you get them into a larger size. Get them more root space. They just took off and grew a lot bigger. So those tend to grow between 10 and 20 foot tall, 10 and 20 foot wide. They are deciduous. Of course, you can do the same thing with if this is not on the street, you can do the same thing with some of the deciduous fruit trees. Most deciduous fruit trees, like apricots, don't get too big.
Okay, so use a fruit tree in lieu of one of these kind of trees that don't give you anything.
Yeah, apricots happen to be considered the prettiest of the fruit trees,
Apricots.
foliage-wise.
And that would be planted as a bare root when they come in?
Yeah, I've got plants in containers too
Okay.
that look good right now.
Last question right now is shade plants. What do you recommend for like shade plants, whether they're edibles or decorative? Because I have an area in the back of the house, against the house, that we're going to clean out, and I want to put some shade
Mhm.
plants there.
A lot of edibles can be grown in the shade, mostly leaf crops and herbs can be grown in the shade. Things that you eat the foliage of.
Okay.
If they have to bloom and fruit, most of those don't work in the shade. But if they're leaf crops, spinach we do starting in about a month and a half. We start growing spinach. Lettuce also about a month and a half to 2 months from now. Again, cabbage, kale, Swiss chard anytime. There's a lot of shade plants like top sellers are clivia and hydrangeas, and we're growing a crop of azaleas.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
Getting to her back to her avocado question. So if a tree is positioned one way in a pot wherever it's at, when you put it in the ground, put it the same direction, or does it matter if you turn it?
well, if you turn it, just watch it so that parts that might sunburn are protected. Like if the stem was, if you have a stem that the sun can hit right flush by the sunlight and it's facing south, you might want to whitewash that portion of the stem. We carry whitewash or use white latex paint and just keep that stem cool and keep it from sunburning.
And then you were mentioning winter crops coming up, like lettuce to plant. You were just saying like in a month and a half.
Well, you have to watch the temperature.
Okay. Well, my question, I guess, is I've got a greenhouse that is about 15 to 20 degrees warmer inside than it is outside. Should I start, if I want to do lettuce for the winter, should I start it in there? And you don't.
Well,
Is it
okay,
too
so
hot?
for most cool season crops, the hottest you can go is 80.
Oh,
If you
okay.
break 80, they bolt.
Okay.
So spinach and lettuce, you get above 80 degrees. On some cool season crops, it's 85. I know cilantro is 85, but broccoli and cauliflower are like 80. Lettuce, I think, is about 80 degrees before it bolts.
So don't start them inside and then put them outside.
No, they'd rather be started out in the cold.
Oh, okay.
Most of the cool season crops, they'll sprout at 45 degrees from seed.
What's good to start in a greenhouse? I've got a greenhouse with nothing in it.
Yeah. Well, tropical
Flowers?
stuff. Yeah. I mean, tomatoes, well, it's kind of late to start tomato seeds, but they like at 100 degrees. They'll sprout really well at 100. They sprout half as good at 70. So a lot of the crops like it really hot.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Is it true that you're not supposed to prune the avocado trees?
You can prune avocados just about any time of year, but if you prune them in the summer, you've got to figure out what's going to sunburn. Because if you suddenly cut something, and like if you cut the bottom branches off, no big deal. But if you cut the top off, and now what was shaded by the top is now in sun, that can certainly sunburn just because it's not used to any light at all. So then you've got to either cover it with shade temporarily or whitewash it so it doesn't burn.
So it does help the plant to be pruned. We haven't pruned our avocado tree for 6 years.
Yeah, usually we'd like to keep them at picking height, so under 10 feet. Most orchards are maintained now around 10 feet, and they do the most of the pruning in the winter months. So, okay, we got some.
We got some online questions here. Here, Ashley, so you can put your mic back in your pocket if it's convenient. So a lot of these questions, the next set of questions comes from the online chat feed. That's going live stream. First question is, how good are finger lime trees? I live in the rainforest in Australia where they originated.
Hello, Australia.
Right?
Well, finger limes do taste, they're tart. A lot of people like them. My daughter really likes tart things, so she'll eat 20 or 30 finger limes at a sitting. A little too tart for me, and they do taste like, they're not even related closely at all to limes, but they do taste like them, and they are totally resistant to that disease that's going around the world too, which helps. We're not allowed to sell them here, but and in Australia they do have the pink finger limes with different colored flesh. I think our finger limes are green. In Australia, I think they have yellow flesh ones and pink flesh ones, which are kind of fun.
Okay, next question. We have a small gem avocado that we planted 3 weeks ago and is not handling the heat well. What can we do to help it survive the heat wave?
Well, if they got it from us, it must be just not watered well. So really get that thing soaked good, because none of our avocado trees here have any problems at all. At least we haven't seen anything come up at all in the last week, because I water them every day and we haven't seen any problems. So apparently it's not getting enough water. So either water daily, twice a day with this heat. If it's in the ground, you got to build a basin around it to direct the water right through the root ball. Especially if you have, if it's in the ground and there's other plants around, they might be stealing the water away from your avocado. But it's got to be a water issue, because we haven't seen any burning on ours or any problems. I have two 15-gallon avocado trees that are growing ground. They're showing some stress, but they're right on the white rock driveway. So they're getting hit by extreme heat. Otherwise, we have a lot of little avocados and everything else right along that same driveway, and they're not showing any problems, or at least not yet. Haven't shown any signs of stress. So it's got to be water. If they got good water, they can evaporate, cool themselves off by evaporation. If they're lacking water, they'll burn up. So.
Okay, next question.
Or if you have a lot of masonry around them, that can cause trouble. So, and they didn't say where they lived, right?
No, they didn't.
Yeah, if you're in Corona, then get them in the shade or shade them. I mean, it's so hot inland, yeah.
Okay, next question. Is neem oil effective for whitefly?
It can be. Neem oil, now whiteflies don't fly once the sun sets. So the way to use neem oil on whiteflies is, if you're spraying them in the middle of the day, they're just doing this. They're just flying around. You can't hit them. But once the sun sets around this time of year, it's around 7:30, between 7:30 and 8. By 8, it's pretty dark. They just sit on the leaf. And if you spray them at that time, you should be able to kill them. But you'll have to do it every week for a while, because more will hatch out. And you can't kill eggs or pupa with neem oil, so you'll have to redo it.
Next question.
Oh, also, if it's the giant whitefly that has all that silky stuff come down, you got to wash it off with water first, so that the oil can get through that stuff. Okay.
If a tree dies but suckers are alive, will they produce fruit? It's a persimmon.
Well, suckers, the rootstock is grown from seed, and it's from a fruit, so it will make fruit, but most likely will not be the persimmon that you think you have, or that you used to have. So the rootstock persimmons are usually small fruit. All are highly astringent until they're ripe. They may taste good. You never know, because I believe those rootstocks are not cloned. They're all seedlings that they grow persimmons on. So every rootstock can be different, and you never know that some rootstock may make good fruit, although it's unlikely.
Okay. Does watering the tree leaves on fruit trees help with the heat?
For about a minute. It doesn't hurt them. I mean, there's a lot of literature going out, false literature saying that it'll cause them to burn because it acts like magnifying glasses. It's like, that's the weirdest thing I've ever read. How does a drop of water burn a leaf? Now, the one thing to note is that droplets of water usually sit on the center of a leaf, which is the exact area that would normally burn because the center of the leaf is furthest from the edge. The edges of the leaves don't usually burn because the edges are cooler. The center of the leaf is where the heat builds up, and that's the same place where water usually collects. So I think people assume the wrong thing, that where the water collects, it's going to burn the leaf, but there's no way water's going to burn a leaf. The water would evaporate before that happened.
Okay, next question. I only have red sand. Can I use it directly or does it contain salt? And do I have to wash it?
I wouldn't know if your red sand had salt in it or not. Now, generally, the sand close to the ocean will have salt. And usually they say within a half mile of the ocean, you can get the sodium from the sea breeze collecting on the soil there. But if you're generally, if the sand was, most of the sand sold and used for construction is from riverbeds. So that would be fairly salt-free, but I don't know your own sand. I mean, I wouldn't know how to test it. I think we might have a test kit for salinity. We might. Otherwise, you'd have to take it to a lab to get it tested. There's soil and plant lab in Anaheim that can do the testing for you.
Next question. How do you deal with Japanese beetles? What will keep them away from your garden? Any sort of plants to keep them away? I see them flying around my garden every day.
This question is not from the East Coast, then it's not Japanese beetles. So Japanese beetles are native east of the Mississippi or east of the Rockies, or they're from Japan originally. Here we have the green June bugs, or the fruit, also known as fig beetles, also known as fruit beetles, and they're in the scarab family. Japanese beetles are about that big, and these green beetles are about an inch or so. So these are, they eat sweet things, so they either eat fruit, overripe fruit, or flower petals. We've seen them eat rosebuds, just munch them through because they're sweet. So that's what they eat as adults. As larvae, they're in the ground, especially in compost piles. Scarab beetle larvae apparently eat fungus. So the famous scarab beetles in Africa eat the fungus that grows in camel dung. So here, compost piles, now there's a lot of fungus naturally in the ground that they're eating. People mistakenly believe that they eat plant roots. Of course, the fungus in the ground is part of the ecosystem of the plant, so it's not great that they're doing that, but they don't usually eat plant roots directly. They're eating the fungus that is in the ground with the plant roots. So now the adults can be trapped. Two of our customers have created traps where they say they can collect 100 a day in these traps. So you'd get a plastic jug, like a water bottle, say a gallon-sized water bottle. And you just cut it like so. And you invert the top so that it's now a funnel. And you put either squished fruit in here or grape juice, which has a nice odor. And the beetles just kind of they fly over here and then slide down the hole into that area. And then you just get a horde of them in there because they can smell the fruit and they can't get out. And you can, anything in your area will get trapped in there. And we've seen, they sent me videos of it. It's noisy. It's so noisy in the video because of all these beetles flapping around in that grape juice. It's just crazy how many you can get in those things. So that's how you get rid of them. Now, Otherwise pick your fruit a little earlier so they don't smell the ripe fruit.
Best nutrients and fertilizer for watermelon.
Well, generally, I don't know that they're that picky, because when I was a kid, I grew watermelons and I didn't even know what I was using in those days, and they grew fine. It's just the heat. They like it really hot. I mean, if you're growing watermelons right now, it's kind of too late. Usually start them by May or June, and I grew them on my sidewalk. They love it hot. Now, I would tell you, I still like this ratio here. So in Orange County, most of the soils in Orange County, we've got plenty of the middle number phosphorus, and that one we really don't need much of that number at all. It's mainly the first number and the last number. First number is nitrogen, which is for growth. The last number is potassium, which is for the juice of the plant. So you want juicier fruit, you get high last number. So that would get you a bigger watermelon. And then plant them around May or June, which is the normal time for growing them. If you start them now, you might get some real small ones. I mean, when I used to grow watermelons back in the 80s, it was cold by October. Truthfully, it's not getting cold until December, the last few years. So you have a chance if you're growing them right now. You got a chance, because we got at least October. Well, most years October's hot. I mean, we haven't seen a cool fall in a while. I can still remember, though, 2006, when we hit 45 degrees in September that year. I still remember that because the maples turned red. That's the only year I've ever seen Japanese maples turn red, was 2006. It was a very cool year, and we hit 45 degrees in late September, which is just crazy. That doesn't usually happen until after Halloween, until you hit 45 degrees at night. So, okay.
So real quick, the three numbers on your for nitrogen and what?
Phosphorus and potassium.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever experimented with super absorbent polymers in your soil mixes?
Yeah, the first time we tried it, we knew it was a failure. So there was a potting soil for a while that had the water absorbing polymers in it. So we put it in a pot, filled it with the potting soil, added water, and of course the polymers absorb water and expand. So all the potting soil is just flowing out of the pot. It's like, this is stupid. The polymers expand when they absorb water and they contract when they dry out. So the potting soil is just flooding out of the pot. And it also, we saw research that said if you add fertilizer to polymers, they don't work anymore. They absorb the salts of the fertilizers and it makes them stop working. So you can't fertilize, and you really can't use them in pots because the soil keeps expanding and shrinking. It's like, what is it good for? So polymers are still being used when they start plants out in the desert or in areas where there's no irrigation. They just put, a whole mass of polymers next to the plant they're starting, and that's already wet, so that it's just like a storage of water sitting next to this plant for a while. And that's pretty much what it's being used for. But it was, the first time we tried it, we go, this is hilarious. It just wasn't going to work. So now, if we had gotten the soil wet before we put it in the pot, we might have tried it, but then when it dries up, then it shrinks. So it's like,
When planting avocado seedlings, what is the reason for leaving a 1/4 inch to 1 inch of the avocado seed sticking up above the soil? Is it so the roots have better access to oxygen?
I don't think there's any rule for that. You can bury the seed. They do it so that they can tell that the seed was planted. Our supplier plants, 20,000 seeds in their greenhouse. And if you can see the seed, then you know it's there. If you can't see the seed, then if it's buried, then you can't, you don't know what's going on. So I think they leave the seed half out of the ground just so you can watch it grow and then graft it easier. Whereas if you bury it, because I've seen avocados come out of the ground in my yard and I couldn't see the seed on them, so they must have been buried by an animal or something and they just came up. So I don't think it's essential to keep it on the surface, but you can certainly watch it grow easier and probably graft easier if it's above. So, did you have a?
On the avocado, I had an avocado tree that I bought,
Mm-hmm.
and I think on the avocado tree that I bought, I think the grafting part died, and maybe is it the rootstock came up. How do I know that it's the rootstock? Because if it is a rootstock, do I get rid of it? I'm not going to get fruit, or what?
Well, if it's rootstock, you'll still get fruits. You just don't know when it's going to do it, how big it's going to be when it fruits, and how the quality of the fruit. So most avocado rootstocks are Zutano, which is it tastes okay, and it certainly produces well. We've seen a lot of people with rootstock growth that love their trees because they're so productive. They're not the best avocado in the world, but they're super productive. If it's close related to Sultana, which it's going to be, it's usually very productive, but it's not going to be the best tasting avocado. Sultana is not sold at any commercial, well, not usually sold commercially. So, but it'll still produce, but you won't know when.
Have you ever experimented with multiple rootstock grafted fruit trees? I guess like 3-in-1s or things like that.
Yeah, so the growers who grow those usually do apples, pears, and stone fruit, and citrus. We did citrus for a few times, but the companies who were selling them and delivering to us wouldn't let us pick out what varieties were on the tree. And apparently what was going on at these nurseries is that contractors go to the nurseries and buy the ones that had all the varieties they wanted, and whatever they couldn't sell to the contractors who were there at their nurseries, they just delivered to us, and we had things like grapefruit, limes, uh, tangelos, and nobody would buy them because they wanted the orange on there and they wanted the Meyer lemon on, and we weren't getting those. So it's like, okay, they were sending us the ones that were picked over. So we stopped getting those. The problem with most stone fruit is that only about 5% of all stone fruit well or have a low enough chill for our area. So it's hard to get a stone fruit that works well here. The ones that are low chill often fruit too early in the year because we need low chill, like peaches. We need low chill peaches that ripen when it's warm, because if it ripens in April or May, or we're too cloudy and the quality is very poor. But most low chill peaches ripen in April and May. So the quality is not there. So it's just hard to find the right selection. Very few plums produce well here. So a lot of those multi-grafts are not good. Now, what's interesting is the apples, for some reason, produce well even if they have high chill. So we will do the apples every year, but we rarely do the other types of stone fruit or pears. Most pears don't do well for us. That's that, and citrus we're not allowed to sell right now. But citrus will work if you get the ones that you want.
Should jump the volume on your mic really.
Hopefully that works.
Okay, here's a good one. Can I put quail droppings directly on trees as fertilizer?
You can. So we've been told by researchers that bird poop is almost pure chemical. That's not like putting. So just be careful of the volume. Now, if it's been sitting around for a while, like chicken manure, It's usually sitting in a chicken coop for up to 6 months before they clean it out and throw it in bags and sell it. So it's not so hot. I mean, birds, when they poop, it's almost pure ammonia. So that can be really hot if you get too much. But if you don't smell the ammonia coming out of it, it's probably okay. But bird poop is really good. Well, any poop is really good fertilizer. So,
But not dog.
well,
Now people would ask that.
it is good fertilizer. It may not be good for your health to have it in your garden, though. I mean, if you can compost at high temperatures to get diseases out, then they would be fine. I mean, they do recycle lots of poop. You know, farms are using human poop, but it is got to be when they first compost. Well, they put it, liquefy it, do the composting that way, and then they set it out in big piles and watch the temperature break 170 for 3 days, so that they know all the human diseases are out of there before they can ship it off to the farms. So dog poop, if you have a compost pile and you can get it up that high, then it should be safe. But I'm no health expert there, so. But you know, human poop was one of the original fertilizers. So.
Okay, my lemon tree has an ant problem. Specifically, what do you recommend I buy to solve the problem?
Well, grow first choice. If it doesn't kill your ants, you got to keep them off the trunk somehow. So you can use a contact poison right around the base of the tree or on the walls around the tree where the tree's touching to keep the ants out of there. You want to keep the ants out of that tree. So, in lieu of that, you have to spray your tree off with oil to get rid of the scale, bugs, and whitefly. I had a neighbor who did control ants in his yard, and my orange tree closest to his side of the yard, I was always spraying it for scale and whitefly.
Next comment to that would be, I have used diatomaceous earth at the base, but they came back. Recently, I sprayed the base of the tree and it worked. Is it bad for the tree?
Depends what you use. Most contact poisons are not systemic, so they don't get into the fruit at all. Even systemic supposedly don't get to the fruit of citrus trees, so it should be okay, but you'd have to read the fine print on the label. The label will tell if you can use it around other crops. Now on farms, on citrus orchards, what we understand is the rules there, they can use a lot of different pesticides in the ground. They cannot sell fruit that hits the ground. So if they can pick it off the tree, it's fine. Once it hits the floor, they got to throw it away because of the pesticide used in orchards.
Can you grow avocados in a Phoenix type climate and bear fruit? What will be the best variety?
Phoenix, nah. I think they were over 100 degrees since May. That's pretty rough on an avocado tree. Now, avocados are native to southern Mexico, which can get really hot, but it's also very humid and rainy for much of the year. So, unless you have misters on a tree in Phoenix, I don't think so. It's just too dry there. You lose all the degrowth for months on end because it can't handle the dry heat. They like it. Now, if you build a structure, shade cloth, 10% shade with misters underneath it, you might be able to keep the climate underneath there a few degrees cooler and more humid. That would help. And it would also keep it a little warmer in the winter because Phoenix gets snow. So that could work, but you'd have to. I don't think out in the open you can do it all. It's just too intense.
What do you suggest for high RSC in soil and water? Does that make sense?
For SC.
Yep.
I'm not sure what that stands for.
Have you grown cashew trees? What is the best soil for them?
Cashew is a tropical. If you have a greenhouse, you might be able to do it. I've never tried it. I mean, it is related to mangoes, I believe. Same family as mangoes and carrot wood trees, which we do grow here. Our top pot is fine. Sand is fine for potting soil. But a lot of tropical trees do not like to drop below 80 during the year. So as a high, every day they want to be at around 80. It's like papayas. If we don't hit 80, they're not happy. So I don't know. Cashews may not have a chance here, but I haven't tried them.
What would be a good wood crate size to get an avocado to fruit? I don't have anywhere to put it in the ground.
Well, a friend of mine had a reed avocado 5 years in a 24-inch box with 80 fruit on it. That's pretty good. I mean, if you go bigger, we have 30-inch and we can get 36-inch and we get even bigger than that. But unless you have a pickup truck, there's no way you can get a 36-inch box into any SUV. Box this tall and wide doesn't fit. Of course, you can make your own boxes. The problem with the wood boxes we have, which are redwood, is that they don't usually make it past 10 years. So after that, what do you do? If you make your own boxes, there are designs on the internet for boxes with removable sides so that you can replace the wood piece by piece and then replace with a good wood after so many years when it starts rotting. But wood is a good container because it's insulating against heat and cold better than plastic does.
Okay, here's a good one. Is it best to put the leaves of the same plant on top of the ground as a fertilizer mulch, or can you use any type of leaves like ficus or pine needles on avocado?
Any leaf will work. I'm sure in nature they planned it so that their leaves are the best. So trees drop leaves for a purpose so that they can be recycled. They did note that rotting avocado leaves put out chemicals into the soil that help prevent root rot. So at that point, he told all the avocado orchards, stop raking your leaves. Leave all the dead leaves underneath the tree. That helps prevent root rot.
What is the best soil for hydrangeas and how much sun is ideal?
Well, hydrangeas can live in any dirt. You're talking about a pot or the ground. They're not really picky. Their color of their flowers changes with the pH of the soil. So if it's a pink or a blue hydrangea that has color in the flowers, they tend to be on the pink or red side in highly alkaline soil with a lot of phosphorus in it. And they tend to be blue or purple with acidic soil with aluminum in it. Otherwise, I don't think the pH really bothers them that much in the native soils around here. But around here, they're naturally pink or red. In a pot, our top pot is fine, or acid mix is fine. Either one of those will work.
How about the sun?
Hydrangeas can go in full sun or full shade. They just can't. The interesting thing was they cannot take the north side of a building as well as it can the south, east, and west. So they get used to the consistency of the light. So like my neighbors had their hydrangeas on the east side of their house, so they always got sun till noon. And I saw a customer in my neighborhood that had on the west side of their house, so they always got afternoon sun and they were fine. The ones I had on the north side of my house were in shade till May, and then the sun got high enough to hit the leaves and it burnt the heck out of the tops of my hydrangea plants because they weren't used to the sun at all until they got hit in May and June, and then by late July the sun was gone again and they were fine again. But that was real interesting that on the north side they burned, but not on the south or east or west sides where they got consistent light. Now just do know that if they're getting sun, they use like 2 or 3 times more water than they do in the shade. So you gotta water them really heavily if they're on the south side. But they will grow in the sun.
Can I grow avocado on a clay mound?
Oh, yes. Yeah, there are a lot of farms with clay soil. If you mound it up, then the clay is better drainage. And in my last house, we put an avocado on purpose right into the mucky clay, but it was at the edge of a slope, the top edge of a slope, and it really it grew 5 feet that year because it was well drained clay.
Hold on, I'm just trying to find the next question. People want a class on loquats and mangoes.
Okay. We may have some loquats pretty soon.
Is worm composting a useful thing to do?
Not really. So worms aren't native to North America at all. According to the researchers or scientists, the worms were totally wiped out of our ecosystem by the glacier actions. So there are no worms native to North America. They're all coming either from China or Europe. And when they've been introduced into the native ecosystems, they merely mess them up. Within the Midwest, they have native forests dying, and they put the culprit to be European earthworms that are now in the ecosystem that are messing up the ecosystem totally because they're not a part of it. I don't know how true that is, but that's what the researchers sort of said. And this was an article in Organic Gardening magazine about 20 years ago. We read it. So they said earthworms do as much damage as they do good. So the only good thing they do is they make tunnels, but they definitely eat plants. I mean, I was amazed back in the 80s. I remember watching an earthworm go to a ground cover and cut off a leaf and drag it to his hole. I thought earthworms were good, and here's this thing dragging a leaf from ground cover into its little burrow. And from that point on, I'm questioning, are earthworms really good? Well, they drill holes in the ground, and that's about the only good thing they do. They eat plants and they mess up the ecosystem. They will eat dead things. So that's another good thing they can do, but so can the native amoeba or protozoas, things, pill bugs. We have pill bugs here that do the same work, that work. Fungi and bacteria do it too. So I wouldn't. It's like so. I don't know. Worms can compost things a little faster than, or turn things into worm poop a little faster than bacteria can do it. But in nature, it's a fungus in the ground that does most of the recycling of dead things.
Any recommendations to top work an avocado tree to graft onto water sprouts?
Well, that's what one grafter explained to us at a meeting 20 years ago. He says his specialty was top working avocados, but he didn't like to try to graft the big trunks. He would just stump the trees in winter, wait for the suckers to start growing in the spring, and graft the suckers that were coming out of the stump, and make a new tree that way. I mean, ideally, I would say it's better to graft. Put a lot of grafts on branches, on those upper branches, waste the trunk. But for him, it was just easier to cut the tree down when the suckers came up out of the stump, just graft those.
So those are all the questions that are feeding live through the class. Now these are other questions that came through email. This question is about a hops plant, and he wants to know what's going on. I don't know if you want to show this photo.
Yeah, so he has the hops, and the leaves are getting spotted up. They look like this, but these do not look like disease spots at all. These look like chewing spots. So to me, it's some kind of insect doing this damage. Yeah, it definitely looks like holes. If it was a disease, usually the spots would be surrounded by yellow halos. These diseases work that way. They surround the spots on the leaves with these other bullseye resistance. So this is more of a bug attack. So small bugs could be tiny grasshoppers. There have been a lot of little grasshoppers out there. Could be beetles, could be caterpillars of some sort that are hard to see. there are other insects that make holes too. So in that case, we would spray it with a, especially if you want to be organic on your hops, with one of the spinosad products, like Captain Jack's or like spinosad soap, and that'll kill any chewing bug. Some places still sell BT, which is a bacterial disease that only kills caterpillars, but BT is only effective for a day or so on the plant. The product can only sit in a container for a few months, and every year you have to buy a new batch because it's a disease that it's like they have to make a new COVID shot every 6 months, it seems. Same thing with BT, that they don't make a new batch of it, it doesn't kill the caterpillars.
Can you suggest a 3-year rotation of vegetable crops, both warm and cold weather?
Okay, well, we do have a list of the vegetable families. So what you have to do when you're growing vegetables is not use the same family. Like the Solanaceae or nightshade family is eggplant, pepper, potatoes, tomatoes, and tomatillo. So if you can plant all those in one bed that year, and then for the next 3 years, you've got to plant something else. And since tomato is the most popular thing we sell, then say summer crop will be tomato. And then now you can do up to 3 crops a year, but you can make it easy. So winter crop, first good one might be the cabbage family. And the next summer crop, then go to the squash family. And the next winter crop, go to the pea family. And then the next summer crop, you might go to the corn. Next winter crop, you might go carrots. And then you can probably go back to the original crop again after that. But there's also the family of beets and the family of lettuce. So those are 2 other crops that can stick in there in the meantime. But yeah, just try to stay out of the same family for the next 3 years, if possible.
Years or planting season?
Years.
Years. Full years.
Yeah, one of my friends runs Orange County Produce, which has property all over Orange County, and they said they're on a 10-crop rotation cycle. And we leased land from them for 4 years. We never saw them put the same crop in those 4 years on the same plot of land. So.
Okay, back to the live stream questions. What are good native flowers here for California to grow in pots?
Well, all the natives seem to do well, but none of them bloom year round. Some of the close natives like verbena. So there is a verbena called Lilacina, which is actually from islands off of Mexico, which they consider the same region, and that thing can bloom year round in a pot. It uses a lot of water. Now this in the ground, this is fairly drought tolerant. In a pot, most drought tolerant plants use a lot of water in pots. It's hard to suck on clay or plastic. So, but Verbena lilacina can bloom year round. I don't know of any other natives that bloom. Well, we just got one in today that may bloom close to that. Solanum xanthi, which is native to the mountains behind Santa Barbara, is a tomato plant relative. Or we still sell a plant called Solanum rantanetti, potato vine bush that has purple flowers. This has deep blue flowers, and it can bloom most of the year. Most natives do well in pots as long as they're in our top pot. Some ceanothus, if you change the soil on them, they're fine. Manzanitas don't change. It's hard to fix manzanitas growing in soils other than our top pot. Sometimes they don't make it. But most natives, if you get them into better soil, they can handle containers year round. So.
Yeah, This is working again. I can't find decent sand for my pots. Can I make the soil without the sand or use vermiculite and Mayfan stones?
What kind of?
Mayfan.
I don't know what that is. Can't find sand. Where do they live? Just go down to a hard big box store, and the sand they use for construction is great soil for pots. We did our testing with big box store sand, all-purpose sand, wash sand, place sand. We used all the different sands, and they all were fine. We grew better looking plants than in any potting soil at the time. We did this 30 years ago, and the sand always beat any potting soil we had. That's when we made our own potting soil out of material that's similar to sand but lighter. So we use pumice perlite in place of most of the sand with a little peat moss, which isn't perfect, but it's fine. And that's our soil mix. But sand was our original potting soil. It was the original potting soil in the 1800s. My father's bonsai books say sand was the original potting soil. They all say the same thing. Sand was the original potting soil, and it's fine as long as you feed it.
So you responded that Mayfan stones are silicate stones that are small and brown.
I don't recall it. It'll probably work if it's rocks. If it's small, larger than pieces of sand, it still works. If it's sand, silt, and clay are mostly quartz, silicon dioxide. I'm sure there's other rocks that can work as soil too, other than quartz, but our soil is mostly quartz.
And then the response to the sand is, I live in Texas, the sand is too heavy.
Sand is heavy here too. I don't. If it's about 100 to 110 pounds per cubic foot, that's the weight of sand. I don't know if you get heavier than that.
Maybe the sand is too far for them to transport the sand.
Oh, too heavy to carry. Well, that's true.
Okay. Hi, Gary. Here's my question for tomorrow's class. What size and grade of perlite do you use?
Well, the grade that's used in our soil mix is medium, but they crush themselves, so find the medium. There is a coarser grade, which is sometimes used and sold, but it's more expensive. The smaller grades are less expensive. So we use, in our mix, it's medium and fine.
I can't get top pot down here in Florida. Do you recommend adding some type of clay to my mix? In your classes on perfect soil, you teach that real soil consists of sand, clay, and silt, but you don't add any clay to top pot and acid mix.
Right, we're using peat instead of clay. Our soil blenders don't use clay, so we can't ask them to put clay in there. Now, vermiculite can work because vermiculite is pop clay. I haven't experimented with that enough to tell you how much to use. We know 30% is too much. It totally gums up the drainage. So if you use vermiculite, it's got to be probably no more than 10%, but I haven't played with vermiculite enough to tell you what the ideal is. I would think even 5% is probably going to do enough water holding to make it work. But I wouldn't, like 5% clay in a soil mix is probably as much as you'd want to do, because my father used to grow things in sandy loam, and in sandy loam that resembles what he used, the clay content seems to be less than 10, higher than 5%. So right around 5% clay in a vermiculite. Now I don't know how vermiculite, how it is similar to pure clay, because vermiculite is popped clay, so I don't know how much you would have to use to get the same amount, but still I wouldn't make it much more than 5%.
Did I hear Gary say a while back that you should not crush dry avocado leaves to use as a fertilizer for avocado in a pot?
I don't recall that. It would probably sit in the pot better if it was crushed.
He goes on to say, is it better to let the 90-day breakdown cycle happen without crushing the leaves?
I don't know if nature cares that much if it's crushed or not. I'm sure there's animals walk by an avocado will crush the leaves pretty good. I don't know. I haven't experimented that way.
What are the best milkweeds to grow here in Southern California?
We're not sure there's a bad one. There's literature both ways saying how bad tropical milkweed is and how it doesn't really matter. So we're uncertain of that. I mean, I've grown both in my own garden. I've grown tropical and the native milkweeds. And what's interesting to me is that some years the local monarchs would only eat the tropical. And other years they would only eat the native. We actually think that there's 2 strains of monarchs in our area, but I don't know. I mean, we've seen on a migration chart. I visited one of the monarch parks in California once, and they had a migration chart of the monarchs east of the Rockies and west of the Rockies. West of the Rockies, they tend to head toward the coast every winter. East of the Rockies, they head down to Mexico. But they did show there was some mix-up going on, Texas and Arizona, where some of the East Coast ones might go west. And if we're getting East Coast monarchs, which usually eat the tropical milkweeds, then that would make sense on some years why some years they would only touch the tropicals. And other years we get only the native monarchs here that would eat the native, again, we haven't, it's not my research project, so I don't know. Someone's got to do the genetics of the monarchs flying around to see if we got East Coast monarchs or West Coast monarchs flying around here. Because that was really odd that happened in my garden, whereas some years they wouldn't touch the other strain of the other species of milkweed. Yes?
Do you know anything about growing wheat berries or wheat?
Wheat berries?
Wheat.
Well, wheat would be a winter crop here. I would think it would work. We've grown oats in our front planter before, and that seemed to do just fine. But it is a winter crop. It likes it. Yeah, it's a cool season crop, just like most cool season grasses.
So if I wanted to plant a wheat berry in the ground, what temperature should I be looking at before I start? If it's a winter crop?
Don't know. Have no.
I mean, because right now it's hot, it's been going to the 80s. Should I wait like in the 70s?
I would think if you put wheat seeds on the ground, they'll sprout when it's time.
Okay.
It's like I used to have a yard full of cilantro. It always came up at the right time in the middle of November, all by itself. And most of the cool season grasses, like we have a lot of foxtail weed grasses. They always come up at the right time too.
So we can plant things now?
You can leave the seeds on the ground. They'll probably come up when they're ready. When it's. Mm-hmm.
Oh, you took out the moringa tree in the front. Was that because it was getting old? Or?
No, we took out a moringa tree because my daughter wants to make a bigger parking lot. And it's fine. I mean, we could use more parking spaces. We only have 9. So that makes another one. So it's a 10% increase. Yeah, you can use the whole tree for something.
Can rice hulls be used as a base or a component for a potting soil or planting bed mixture?
We haven't used it, but it's all throughout Europe. They do recycle rice hulls as part of mixes, and the claim is they just don't decompose, even though they're plant material. They would try composting them, and they wouldn't compost at all. So they're almost inert. They said that rice hulls are actually 90% silicon by weight or something. So there's not much organic matter in it at all. It's mostly silica, which is the same thing as sand. So they say in Europe it is being used as a perlite substitute. Now we will love to see rice hulls in our soil mix, but the company who mixes the soil for us will not. They said they do not like rice hulls because when they take them to their factory, they blow all over the place. They're just too light. They just blow over everything. So we're stuck with perlite instead of rice hulls.
When should you stop watering or limit watering plumerias here in South Los Angeles?
Well, in the right soil, you can water them the same year round. It's just that most potting soils that are being used for plumerias are rotting them if they stay wet. And it's worse when the tree is dormant, not using water, when the plumeria is not using water. So if you're using the wrong soil, stop watering when the leaves fall off or when it gets cool. I mean, generally we water every day from April. Well, this year April was cold. From April through November we water daily, and from November to April we water weekly. Is our normal watering cycle at the nursery. Plumerias, we'll water them every day. This time of year, we'll water them every day in the winter. Whenever we water them because they're in our top pot and they won't rot. I'm sure in Hilo, Hawaii, it rains there practically every day, and they grew plumerias there too. So, but it's warm, of course.
What is the watering schedule for dragon fruit?
Daily. I'd water them daily. Any production plant, all the research we're getting is the more frequently and lightly you water, the better the production. All the research is showing that. There's a grape vineyard that waters 18 times a day. A lot of orange orchards now water 3 times a day. They're not using more water, they're using smaller amounts but more consistently, trying to keep the moisture levels even as you can, improves production. And dragon fruit's from the tropics, it's from the pretty wet areas, so they like it wet. They can handle dry, but they don't produce well under dry conditions. So.
What size pots would you recommend for native milkweed?
Depends which natives. A lot of natives will grow 5 feet high and wide, so that's going to need a 15-gallon or a 24-inch box. The local native fascicularis, Slepius fascicularis, at least 2 by 2, so that would need at least a 15-gallon pot for something that big. Ground is better, but if you don't have ground, then I would go at least 15-gallon and get it in our top potting soil, because they certainly rot easy in most commercial potting soils.
Okay, question about Japanese black pines. I planted them in the ground. What is the best fertilizer to apply to promote fast growth?
Well, what makes them grow faster, they say, if you're in the state of Washington, Japanese black pines will hit 100 feet in 40 years. Here in 40 years, they might hit 20 foot. We're just not the right climate for exceptional growth. So apparently they need the cool winters to really get going. I don't know how you can provide that. Fertilizer-wise, I would say they're not that picky. I still like these numbers a lot. High first number is quite important. So this fruit tree fertilizer will work. Most pine trees, again, don't grow that fast, so you wouldn't need as much. Now, the worst thing about Japanese black pines is they come down with spider mites, spruce spider mites, sometimes every year, that make them turn real yellow. So hit them with oil or blast them with water now and then to keep the needles from getting the mites on them. But yeah, black pines do not like warm winters. They'd rather have it colder. And they can grow, usually they put on spring growth and fall growth. So.
A question from Australia. My pH here in our sandy soil, I have trouble establishing citrus in the ground. Could the pH of my limey soil be a factor?
Well, generally it shouldn't be unless it's well over 10, because citrus aren't that sensitive. I don't know. Watch. I would be more asking if the plant's being grown in compost by the local grower. If it's growing in sand, I would think that would work, and that I don't think the pH would matter. Of course, if the pH is too high, you can add sulfur to the ground to lower it, because all pH does is generally it affects the availability of chemical fertilizers. It doesn't, if you have organic fertilizers, it doesn't matter what the pH is, but if you're using chemical fertilizers, nitrogen and iron dissolve better at low pH, phosphorus at high pH. So that's what would matter is the fertilizers. It's not really, organically, it shouldn't affect it at all if using organics. Unless the pH is way out of line. Now, it could be salinity. Salinity, if the soil's got too much salt in it, which is different, then that can cause tip burning, but then so can bad roots. I don't know. He'd have to tell us what kind of soil that thing was being grown in.
Is salinity a problem? If I keep using liquid fertilizer for pots or the ground, will the fertilizer stack in the soil as salt? If yes, how to deal with it?
Well, generally in a pot, if the drain holes at the bottom, the salts are flushed out, so it's not a problem. In the ground, it can be a problem. They say if winter we don't get a good 8 inches of rain in a short period of time, then you don't get the salts flushed out. This year we had 20, last year we had 30. So there shouldn't be any salts right now at all in the ground that are bad. If you have a salt burn going on, it's from something else, probably bad roots. Unhealthy roots can cause a salt burn look. What we used to think was salt burn happened to be plants growing in bark. So, but generally, yeah, this year and last year, no salts in the ground.
If you refrigerate sprays like Neem spinosad, Gary's mixture of energy and growth, can they last indefinitely?
Don't know. I mean, we like to use things up because of bacterial growth in there, and all a refrigerator does is slow it down a bit. It won't stop it. So still, I would say make a fresh batch each time. The pH of our tap waters can destroy things too. If you use distilled water, in theory, you can keep things a lot longer because our tap water is so dirty and the pH is so high that affects some chemicals are affected. But anything, if you have something with a nutritional thing in it, like our molasses product, you'll certainly get mold in there over time, even if it's refrigerated. If it's frozen, no, but then you have to defrost it.
I bought a bag of gypsum. How much should I apply per fruit tree and non-fruit trees?
Well, gypsum's a part of wood of plants and it's part of the fruit too. So any plant, any tree can use a lot of gypsum. Now, Brokaw, on their website, I believe it says 35 pounds per tree per year, which is a lot. Of course, we're talking 15-foot wide trees, so it won't look as much. But I remember in containers 8 inches across, they would have what looked like a handful of gypsum on the top of that soil. So that's a lot of gypsum. That's a handful, it might be a quarter of a pound or so of gypsum right on a 3-gallon sleeve. So apparently gypsum doesn't burn anything if they're applying that much to it. It's calcium sulfate, it's for the calcium.
Do you mix gypsum in the soil or you just put it on the top?
You put it on the top. So on the surface of the soil, the main thing it does that's good for one of the things it does is good for plants is it helps water absorb quicker, and it'll also help replace sodium buildup. So when gypsum's on top of the ground and sodium's in the ground, then the gypsum calcium ions replace the sodium, which are bad, and allow the sodium to leach away. So that's one reason they apply gypsum, is to leach out sodium, especially if you have a garden near the beach. There's a lot of sodium on the surface of the ground. And but the other thing is it helps water absorb faster while it's sitting on the surface.
I didn't hear covered is how strawberries are propagated to the bare root state before being sent to the customers. As far as I know, they're not true to type, so can't be grown from seed. I could be wrong on that though.
Yeah, strawberries are grown from runners, so each strawberry cultivar is one genetic type, and what the strawberry plant does is it sends off these runners that start new genetically identical babies, and these runners are what they are growing. So there's a big nursery, Lassen Canyon, up in the Sierra foothills, that's growing runners of all the strawberry cultivars. So they're all genetically the same. They're at altitude, so I think it's 4,000, 5,000 foot up in the hills. So they're already getting cold nights by next month. By end of this month, they're already getting cold nights. So what they want to do, so the advantage of getting new strawberry plants this fall, rather than growing the same strawberry plant. So if you grow the same strawberry plant year after year, they will not make their spring bloom until they get enough winter chill. And so most strawberry plants will not start blooming until next spring. If you get the plants that we get starting in October, they've been up in the high Sierra or the Sierra foothills, and they're refrigerated before they're brought down here. So they've got their winter chill when the growers get them and put them in the 6-packs, or when we get them bare root, they've already got their chill. And when you put them in the ground in October, November, when we get them, they will start their spring bloom immediately, and you'll have berries by Christmas. Otherwise, you won't have berries until next spring and maybe late spring. And they do their best bearing during cool weather, so it's better in your, as far as your crop grows, to start a new batch every year here, because we don't have enough, our winter's so late that we don't get the benefit of the winter. Yes.
Regarding the strawberries, half shade, half sun, full sun?
Full sun. And you'll know your strawberry plant's healthy. If it's in our top pot, the strawberry plants grow about this big. In most potting soils, they grow about this big. But if you grow them in pure sand, which we did back in the 90s, or if you grow them in our top pot, the strawberry plants are over 1 foot across, sometimes close to 2 foot across.
What about blueberries? Are they similar in that respect as well? Or
Well, blueberries need a chill, but most blueberries are from Florida and they don't need much of a chill. So we find most of our blueberry plants will bloom normally in January, February, and March here. So they don't need much chill at all. I mean, some of the blueberries, they swear in Florida need 500 hours. You get them here, they get by with 200. So we have a much different climate than Florida does. So.
When should I prune my loquat tree, and do you recommend heavy pruning?
Well, I used to keep a loquat tree pruned real heavily so I can pick the fruit, but I would prune it the day I took the crop off so that it wouldn't affect the next growth. If you cut every branch off, well, if you cut all the leaves off right after you harvest the fruit, then you're not going to get any crop next year. So I would cut off all the tall branches, but leave the lower branches intact, and those can still bloom that later in the year, because they usually bloom in fall, late fall through early winter, and most of them fruit between late winter and summer. The one I used to cut back every year would fruit around February, March, and I'd cut it severely back at that time, and then it would bloom the next year in November, October, November. It was an early bloomer.
Regarding the loquat, is there a male and female?
No, all in the same flower.
This one customer wants to know where you bought your denim outfit.
This is just hardware store. This I don't know. My daughter ordered them. I don't know what company she used. But normally I'd get denim from probably either Penny's or Macy's if they're still in business. Yes.
So Gary, also my jam has these black stems. Now is that a disease or is that normal?
Well, a lot of avocado branches die within the tree, especially if they're in the interior. They just end up dying because they're not getting any light anymore. So that can happen from that. A bug attack sometimes cause them to turn black. Sometimes they can burn. Where you are, I don't think it would burn. It's probably lack of sunlight. Yes. Best time to plant raspberries. Anytime. They're a perennial. We get our best selection in December. And according to our local experts, Caroline has been the best performer in his yard, but none of the raspberries have done well lately. The winters we've had have been so mild the last few years. It's like nothing close to freezing at all. This year, I don't think we dropped into the 30s at all. Last year, we might have gotten to the mid 30s for a day, and that's it. And the raspberries, I don't know, my raspberry plant at my house looks okay, but it didn't produce much at all this year, and no one seemed to have gotten anything last year on them. So we get a huge selection of them in December. We'll get in, on raspberries, we'll get Caroline, Baba, which is native to Southern California. We'll get a yellow raspberry in, and maybe one other. Yeah, the blackberries have been doing much better for us, especially we have some right now, Prime Freedom. That seems to be the best blackberry to have because it can fruit 2/3 of the year, and it doesn't need the cold to fruit. It's a prime blackberry, prime type. The prime blackberries and raspberries supposedly fruit in the fall on current growth, so they don't need the winter to make them fruit.
Another question about sand. I guess people are having a hard time finding it. She says sand when wet turns to cement. Is that true? Can I make your mix without sand?
Sand doesn't turn to concrete. No truth to that. When things get wet, they're easier to dig in general. If your sand has clay in it, then when it gets dry, it might get hard. But if it's wet, it doesn't make soil hard.
If I make a container mix, hold on here. Actually, I'd love for tips about growing star fruit.
Well, what was interesting, now this was 40 years ago when I first started growing star fruit. We had winters back then, so we knew that they would get frost damage if they were exposed to frost. So what I did is I grew them underneath the eaves, the south side of my house underneath. I had 5-foot eaves and I put them underneath there. So they were getting a little protection from intense light because they're close to the house, no wind on them, and protection from frost. And they did, I had 2 star fruit and they both did really well. I had Arkin and I had a white one. I can't remember the name of the white one, but both of them fruited real well underneath there, and whatever stuck out beyond the eaves froze in the wintertime because we had some really nasty winters back in the 80s and early 90s, and when it froze anything that was sitting out in the open. But underneath the eaves, they would do well. And we've seen that several times that our old store we had, southeast side of the store had a 10-foot eave on it, and they fruited well there. But we put them on the opposite side, which is full sun on hot asphalt, they would just shrivel on that side. It could have been root health, where the roots weren't perfectly healthy, so that they were doing better under partial sunlight, under protection. Because a friend of mine does grow star fruit out in the open, but on the north side of a fence. It might be northwest side of a fence, so he still gets good sun on them. Of course, it is between the house and the fence, so it is somewhat protected there too, but he gets star fruit year round on his plants, and he lives on a little hill.
If I make a container mix of perlite and peat for fruit trees, what is a good ratio?
I don't know if I would do just those two materials. Add sand to it. 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 would be a good mix. Peat moss does degrade over time and disappears. So if you had half and half, your soil will be shrinking for the next 2 or 3 years as the peat disintegrates slowly. So I would go, if I would say 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 sand, peat, and perlite would be a very, very good mix. Or just all sand. When I have a fruit tree in the nursery here in a 24-inch or more pot. It's been in sand, 100% sand since the late 90s, and it looks really good. Still looks good.
What is the most effective way to root plumeria cuttings?
Cut them, dry them for a week, and stick them in our top pot. I would cut off the leaves. Don't pull them off, just cut most of the leaf surface off so they don't dry up and shrivel up. Set the cutting in the shade for a week somewhere so the cut in has time to heal, and then you just stick it in our top pot. And they like it hot, so black plastic container tends to work really well. Black plastic in the sun. We had a plumeria specialist work for us once, and she told us she would put them on the top of her VCR box where it was a little over 100 degrees, and they'd root really fast at over 100 degrees.
Any ideas for controlling squirrels?
Kill them, trap them, drive them away, air rifle. They're difficult to control. You can enclose your entire backyard in a screened off area. That'll stop them.
I've heard that some fruit trees don't fruit because they don't stress to produce. Is that true? And is it okay to stress them?
Well, for a while there was some credence to drought stressing, because they noticed that when you drought stress a stone fruit like a cherry, peach, plum, nectarine, in the summer months, it puts out flowers right after the drought stress. Well, we usually have plenty of water when they're supposed to bloom in the spring, so that won't work for us in the ground. But still, I don't think drought stressing will get you your best crop. It's better just to have the cool temperatures. Now, apples don't need wind. They'll still bloom and fruit without winter, and so will pears. Apples, what you want to do is our last winter wasn't cold enough to make most apples drop their leaves. So the thing we would do is by March, you would strip all the leaves off, because apples are due to bloom usually by April. So if they don't drop their leaves by March, just strip them off the tree. The fact that they don't have leaves helps the buds to start growing, because leaves inhibit buds from sprouting. So take the leaves off and just wait. They just start growing on their own. So,
Is there a difference between activated charcoal and biochar?
don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Can you use normal soil for strawberry plants? I don't have your soil for acidic plants.
Sand works perfectly. So we grow the best looking plants, strawberry plants, when you put them in just a bag of sand or just pure sand. Usually at least 2 to 3 gallons worth to grow a strawberry plant, and then fertilize them good and water them well. That was the plant that convinced us that commercial potting soils were bad, because in pure sand we had a strawberry plant that was this big with leaflets that big. In commercial potting soils back in the early 90s, the plants were about 8 inches across with leaflets that big. And that convinced us that commercial potting soils were of negative value. Compared to sand, they're of negative value. I mean, nothing beats sand. So sand is easily the best potting soil.
How deep does the soil go to let the tree breathe to make it sturdy? I'm in a hurricane area.
Well, plant roots in nature only get down to maybe 2 foot, maybe, and that's in a very sandy or gravelly soil. In an average homeowner house, they would go down about 1 foot because our soil is generally compacted in a home environment. I mean, generally, to make a tree not blow over in a hurricane, the roots have to go this way, not this way. You know, when you stake up a tent, you want to support it horizontally, not vertically. Vertical doesn't really hold them up as well as horizontal support. So the roots go out wide, that helps. But it's hard to make them go deep unless you can replace the soil with sand or gravel straight down or all over your yard. So
When the compost decays to fine soil, is that still not good to use?
compost is not done decomposing until it's carbon dioxide and water. So it's still not a stable material that you can use. I mean, there are some things in compost that never decompose. So if you're down to that, that's fine. But if you put that stuff in water and it still stinks the water up in a week, it's not done yet. So we'd rather not use compost. Is nothing similar that to quartz. Quartz is permanent. Now charcoal is permanent. You can use charcoal as a soil mix because it doesn't break down. So that's one organic matter, and rice hulls might be a second that can be used as a soil mix or blend, but most compost I would not trust.
I noticed that you don't sell nut trees. Any possibility you would have them in the future, such as pistachio?
So we sold this year walnuts. We tried to get almonds, which do fine pretty good here, but we couldn't get them this year. Pecans have done well in the area too. Macadamias do fine here. I get that from a different supplier. I don't have anything right now, and we grow some on our own. Pistachios, the trees will be green here, but they don't produce well unless you're inland another 20, 30 miles. It's got to be really hot for half the year. We're only hot here for maybe 3 months. Pistachios would love Las Vegas, Phoenix, Fresno, Modesto. That's where they grow them. Here, the trees will grow leaves and even flowers, and even they said that they'll make seed pods here, but they'll be empty because we don't have the heat to create the nuts inside. Plus, pistachios are really expensive trees. We have to retail them for over $100 a piece, and you need both male and female, and only the female's fruit. So there's a lot of factors that are not to their liking. We don't have the chill they need, and we don't have the heat that's best for them either. So now we do grow Chinese pistachio, and they do make little nuts here, but I don't know if they're edible.
How about decomposed granite as a potting mix?
It's good. We used to use 20% decomposed granite in a store mix that we grew our own plants in. It does have some clay in it, so you have to watch the source, because decomposed granite is just loam soil before the river makes the pieces smaller. So it does have clay. It does have lots of rocks and gravel. It's, a lot of quartz in it. But it depends on where the decomposed granite's sourced from. But we did use it as part of our mix 20 years ago. We had it as part of our mix.
And just a few more questions here. I've tried to grow a lot of California natives. Some live, some die. I don't know how much to water, how often, how much. My nursery grows theirs in lava rock mix, zero bark.
They shouldn't die then. I don't know. We haven't had, so we grow all ours in our top pot. I know some nurseries that grow natives grow them in coconut coir, which I wouldn't trust for very long. A lot of nurseries grow them in ground up bark and ground up wood. Volcanic rocks would work. I mean, we water ours every day, year round, and we haven't found a native yet that's sensitive to that daily irrigation. I mean, we grow Matilla poppy, all kinds of ceanothus, mimulus, verbenas. Let's see what else we grow. All the sages. We haven't had any problem with any of the salvias. We're growing now heteromeles, the toyon, giant sequoias. Sequoias don't. The coastal redwoods don't seem to rot at all. We've grown a lot of native. We call it Chalcedrus decurrens. The what is that called? California incense cedar. The Catalina cherries. Yeah, we haven't found anything yet that rots if it's kept wet. I mean, we think all plants love it when it rains. There's no reason they would not want to be wet that we can think of, unless there's some kind of compost stuff in the soil somewhere. So,
Customer asking, given your optimum soil, is it best to use organic or chemical synthetic fertilizers?
well, both can work. In our top pot, it's an artificial environment. You know, volcanic rock, sponge rock doesn't occur in nature that often. So we use a chemical fertilizer because the organics take a while to work in that kind of environment. They're better if they're a native soil. But they both can work. Chemical fertilizers don't help the soil quality. So if you've got clay soil and you want to make it better soil, you've got to have some organic component in there to do that work. So organic still is necessary for an ecosystem in the ground. In pots, it's pots kind of an artificial environment. So
Ask Gary why he doesn't speak more about the bricks system.
I don't know much about sweets.
The sweetness of fruit?
Yeah, that's the sweetness. I'm not sure how that's measured and how it measures how much sweetness is in the fruit itself. And since sugar is bad for us, it's like, the fact that they're making fruit sweeter and sweeter might be explaining why America's getting bigger and bigger. So I don't necessarily go for tell people, this is the sweetest fruit is better for you. It's like, that may not be the case at all. It may be that the sour fruit is actually better for our health. But I still like the sweet fruit. I just don't eat as much as I used to. I mean, I used to eat 5 servings of fruit every day, if not more than that. But now I only eat 1 or 2 pieces of fruit a day. And I'm a lot lighter than I was. But that's from other diet things too. So a lot of the diet that we're being told is proper to eat is not what we should be eating. So
Okay, we're almost. I should end it with this because we're almost out of time.
okay.
Here's one more. Here's a good one. I have a very morbid question, but it's important. If I were to bury a dead animal, such as a cat or any other small animal, and if I were to plant flower bulbs on top of it or a tree or shrub, will the plant die? No compost will be used. I just want to give a proper burial and want a plant to thrive also. I have clay soil.
We've done it. No problem. I mean, generally, it'll cause a small area where the roots can't grow because it's decomposing without oxygen. It's creating some sewer gases there. So the roots will just avoid that exact spot, but they'll be able to pick up the nutrients from that. In fact, the fungus in the ground will probably be thriving around that area, picking up the nutrients and transferring it to the plant from the dead animal. But yeah, that's fine. I mean,
Doesn't matter how deep it is.
Well, if it's too deep, the plant won't get the nourishment. So it's got to be in the top foot and a half of the soil to get nourishment from it. So if that's your intention, yeah, it's got to be within, I would say within 18 inches of the surface. I don't know what the legal,
Yeah.
you know, in cemeteries, what, 6 feet? But yeah, we have a cat buried in one of our planter beds out here about a foot down, and there's some good looking bushes growing on top of it. So it should work.
Just one more in response to that brick system. There's talk that the brick system is in direct correlation between plants' health and disease resistance.
Don't know. I mean, plants fight off diseases with energy they store, and it's usually stored as some form of sugar. So I would imagine if the plant is sweeter, it's got better resistance to disease. I mean, they say that the tree that has the most disease-resistant wood is an apple tree, although it's fire blight can just totally mess it up, which is a bacterial infection, but it's very resistant to fungus. So I don't know the answer to that, yeah. But it may correlate in that plants with better carbohydrate storage are usually have better resistance to stress. Okay, thank you.